Today, everyone's kind of come together to talk about decoding private equity. How do you get the most out of that partnership? How do you get the most out of the relationship? And we know that reporting can sometimes be stressful. We know that even the best leaders can kind of come into that and not know what kind of information do I put forward, what's going to be meaningful. And super excited to have both Brad and Ann here with us today. They are going to be, offering some great insight and input from the front lines, what they see, what is good, better, best to look like. Brad is with Frontier Growth, operating partner, and we also have Ann, who is the CMO with Sierra Ventures. So I'm actually going to turn it over to both of them and let them give a quick intro. So Brad, I'll toss it to you first.
Okay, well, thanks. Yes, like Tanya said, I work with Frontier Growth as an operating partner on the go-to-market side. So I'm very functional and very germane to what we're going to talk about today. So my responsibilities include strategy, planning, and go-to-market execution for all revenue-facing functions. So I'll envelope sales, marketing, customer success, or anything else that drives that top line growth. But in addition to that, I actually carry two business cards. So Frontier keeps me pretty busy, but I also work on my own independently through my own LLC called Velocity GC, where I work with similarly growth funded organizations to help them do the same things. The difference is I'm just doing it direct through, instead of through Frontier. So I'm pleased to be here, Tanya. We've done some work together and we have loved our relationship. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. And Ann, over to you.
Yeah, my name's Ann Garini. I am CMO at Sierra Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm. We just raised our 13th fund based in Silicon Valley, but we're geo-agnostic. We'll invest all over, primarily seed and A, all B2B. And so prior to this, I was an operator for years. So I've basically sat in both seats. At Sierra, I sit both on the investment team as well as I run all of Portfolio Services, our platform for helping our early stage companies really get to those main markers from seed to A and beyond. So oftentimes consulting them on helping them figure out these go-to-market challenges in the early stage.
Right on. Well, thank you both for joining us. I personally am excited to see this come to life. Brad can probably tell you that this idea came about probably a year ago where we started talking about it. And he was so great to let me toss some ideas off of him. And, it was something that I noticed in the market and a gap, right? So I think that even the traction and the people that have decided to join us today are curious about it too. We're going to launch a quick poll and kind of gauge the audience. And while we're looking at this, you see it now up on your screen. Tell us, when you're preparing for your board report, what does it feel like? Does it feel like I am the emperor and I have no clothes? It feels like I'm taking a stress test. I'm about to make dinner for Gordon Ramsay. I'm Ralphie in A Christmas Story with an A+ on my theme essay. Or I'm walking a tightrope. I have my answer. A while back when I was working with, one of the first startups that I worked with, and we were getting ready to go into the board. I definitely know what my answer is. I want to see what everybody kind of comes back with first. But something that kind of ignited just the thought behind this conversation that we're going to have, right? Every leader, I've noticed it, whether you're a CEO, you're a tenured leader, with the exception of, I'll take our CFOs out of that. If there's any CFOs that are with us today, they're probably like the only ones when they go into a board meeting are like, these are my people, right? Like, I got this. These are my people. For the rest of us, it doesn't matter if you're new, if you've, been running a company for a long time. There's this transition that happens when you go in and report to your board. Sometimes it's met with anxiety. Other times it's met with, I'm good, I've got this. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything, right? Like, where do I start? Some of us have a background in marketing. Some of us, it's sales. Others, it's, you're a founder, right? And you created the product. What we're trying to do is really kind of paint that picture of, we all have beautiful graphs and stories and it all looks good to us. But if we can't tie it back to revenue, and if we can't tie it back to data that sparks that conversation, with our board and with our PE partners. They're there to give advice. They're there to help you dive in and understand the things that you don't see. And the best way to do that is with data. Hopefully we'll see our results here soon and kind of see the lay of the land, but we will go ahead and all right, here we go. So, oh my gosh, we had 100% of people said they felt like they were making dinner for Gordon Ramsay. So they think they are good chefs. They think they've got the best ingredients and they can lay it out, but they are totally prepared to hear about where they can fix it and get better. So I love that. Mine was Ralphie. I felt like this is so, because I come from a marketing background. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be the best thing that they've ever seen. And it's like, no, you get a C+, Ralphie. Like, let's be real about this. So, with that said, let's kind of, dive into our questions here. And, I'm going to kind of put it over to, Brad, we'll go to you first and say, like, when your portcos come to you and they're getting started, tell us a little bit about the significance of the data and the communication. Like, how does it set the tone?
Well, I like your poll a lot, and I think the birds in your background like the poll quite a bit too. So they were chirping on it, so that was really great. But I've worked with dozens of companies, and every time there's a board meeting, it does feel like a mad scramble and what to put together, and everybody's trying to figure it out. And what do they really want to see? And part of that might be leadership gaps because they really don't understand what the board's looking for. But I think there are some basic principles that the board members have when they're talking with their portcos. And I think one of the keys that I see is that the board's your friend. They want you to succeed. And while it might be scary because you don't have all the answers and they might poke at a lot of different areas, the business way better than they do. A board member, by necessity, kind of skips on the water. They shoot in for the board meeting and then they move on to the next one, and they're never as deep into the business as you are. So, one of the things that I'd want the group to feel like is it shouldn't be intimidating because they want you to win. And number two, you guys know so much more than the board does. They're never deep enough into the organization to be able to tell the stories that you can tell. So I think that's where I'd start with kind of the context that you operate in. And I don't know what you see. Is that kind of similar?
Yeah. So how I always like to think of it, when I spent years running marketing prior to moving over to the venture side or running the go-to-market function in general. And the first thing you really got to learn, especially in the early stages, is you never want to bring problems to a CEO without some solutions, right? And I think that the same applies to your board meeting. You never want to bring just problems with your pipeline, problems with your funnel, problems with whatever it is in the business, hiring, whatever that could be, to your board member without thinking through what are some possible solutions. But I agree. I mean, a great board member is a partner. They will not know your business as well as you do, because a lot of times they're also professional board members, meaning they're going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. The best ones really do have more than just context. The best ones are really there not to just offer suggestions, but to roll up their sleeves and get their hands dirty and help out collectively with the team. That's what we really strive for at Sierra. But, they're not there to just give you direction. They're there to help and give you some guidance, as well as what are the resources that you need tactically to get to where you need to be. If you're not there yet, well, what do you need to do? And what's the plan to try to get there? At the early stage, I was just talking to a founder earlier this morning. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to work every time. In fact, it won't work a lot of times. You're going to run up against a wall. You're going to get punched in the face, hopefully metaphorically, but that's going to happen. That's natural in this process. But it's really about what's your reaction, what's your rebound, and how are you going to get back to your milestones and get back on track.
That's great advice. I love the idea of if you got a problem, have a solution for it. That you don't wait for the board to solve it, because really that's what they hired you for, right? And is they hired you to deal with problems and come with solutions, and don't rely on them to come with it, because then they're going to leave there and you're going to lose credibility, and they're going to leave there thinking, why do I got this guy if I got to tell him what to do? So you want to be able to advise on those issues.
And I think there's another element to it as well, as you only have so many like bullets in your gun, where you can't just be going constantly to your board to try to solve all your problems. You got to really think about what can you solve yourself collectively as a team, whether you're a founder or go-to-market leader. And then where can you apply that ask and really try to get, whether that's to a key introduction. Are you ready for that introduction, especially if you're trying to sell enterprise or something to that? Like, are you prepared for that? And then on like the go-to-market front, I get to work with all our early stage companies. And like, where do you need the help? Where is it tangible? Is it in that hiring process, or do you have a gap of something you want to test and just need some guidance on? So yeah, I think that's how that relationship works best. But, going back to the larger point, it's a partnership, and we're here to help those companies, our portfolio, succeed. And we're willing to do whatever we can to make it happen.
I know, Tanya, you want to talk about metrics and data and stuff like that, but there's one more log I want to throw on this fire, which is
go for it.
Real. Actually, with Frontier, I have this thing called the SLX, Sales Leadership Exchange, where we get all the sales leaders together on a regular basis to talk about stuff that's top of mind. And one of the top topics that came out is, how do I work with a board? So I think this is like an everybody problem, not problem, but an everybody issue. What do I do to put my best foot forward? And one of the things that you've got to do is be real, because they're really, really smart people, and they're going to know if you're BSing them. And nobody appreciates that. So if you have a problem, tell them, I've got a problem, but here's the solution. In fact, I think on the board, and we'll talk about standard packages and stuff like that. But one of the things that the board's going to want to know is not so much looking back, because that's old news. Okay, what'd you sell? Yeah, we know we sell because we got the board deck before the meeting. We understand that. We might have questions on why it happened, but what we really care about is what's the look forward. And part of that is, if you did really well, what are you doing to keep it going? If you didn't do well, be honest. Hey, I got problems here, I got problems here, but here's how I plan to solve it. So I think just candor, and sometimes that means you're going to have to, I think, Ann might have said, get punched in the face a little bit. Sometimes it's going to happen, but that is a reality. If it's not going well, you got to fix stuff. So I think that trueness and transparency is a super important thing to maintain credibility with the group.
Absolutely. And is it fair to say that sometimes when they come with data, right, like they can come with, what I see is a lot of people will, hey, here's our web traffic, here's some great stats, here's some pieces of that puzzle. But if they don't know how to correctly connect the pieces of that puzzle to stimulate the conversation, then it makes it harder, longer, more challenging to figure out where those gaps are, where those issues are, where you can have some quick wins versus what's a longer term strategy for the overall health of the business. And I think that's where like a lot of people maybe that are with us, they kind of get tripped up and like, hey, I'm putting forth data. Okay, help me. And it's like, but if you can put that effort first into figuring out, here's the data, here's how it impacts my business and ultimately translates to revenue, what am I missing? So how does that, help you in how you're guiding to say like, here's how you can tell the story to us?
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, ask Ann a question. So your company is a little bit different than our companies. They're both not super big, but they're at different stages in their journey, right? So one of the questions that I have, because I sit in these board meetings and I can't see everybody, but raise your hand if this ever happened. It's 120 pages. and then you got an appendix, and you have 3.5 hours, and invariably at 3:28 you're on page 67, and then you have to, kind of rush through the rest of it or ignore the rest of it. So I think that's one of the board issues, is like, what's the data that you really want to know, and more isn't better, better's better, right? So, and I'd be interested in your take, like from the go-to-market side, what level of information do you want to see? Web clicks and stuff like that, or what would you be looking for?
Yeah, I think to your first point, what I've done at past startups, and I think what some of the founders do best, is there shouldn't be any surprises in the board meeting at the end of the day. Like, there should be you should not walk away being shocked at what you just saw, right? Like, you should deliver your board slides ahead of time, because there is a lot. And what you don't want is to have a meeting where you're just talking through a bunch of slides. Like, a lot of that data can be ingested ahead of time, and then using that time to better dive deeper into the areas that, need some extra explanation, or potentially just need help, things you need help with. But, yeah, going back to your question, can you phrase it again, Brad?
Well,
just to make sure.
what's like, I'll give my answer too, but because we're kind of different companies. But what level of detail are you looking for on the go-to-market side? Now, what are the kinds of things that you'd like to see?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, vanity metrics are purely vanity metrics. I think everyone can see through them. I mean, sometimes it's nice to have the little wins, and so having it in there in some capacity is fine. But really what we want to see for B2B companies is, you want to see pipeline. You want to see how these metrics are going to fit into the pipeline, and you want to see if there's a repeatable process that can be built. So if you have one-offs, I mean, I always give PR a little bit of a hard time. We do PR as a firm. There's a reason for it, and it can drive awareness, and that's important for your brand in a lot of ways, but it's hard to be repeatable. And so that repeatability factor is so important, because if you're just, have one-off events constantly, it's hard to see that engine working. They're great. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think that there's a place for them as well. But I think what VCs get excited about in that go-to-market engine is, what is that repeatable process? Here's our funnel. Here's how we're driving. I personally don't care about leads. I think leads should die. It's just the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
We had a joke we called top of the funnel tofu. So we had like a whole no tofu campaign at some point, because I just don't care. Like, I didn't care while I was operating either. Like, it doesn't, marketing, you own pipeline, drive middle of the funnel, drive quality. Top of the funnel is a distraction at the end of the day. And so focus on, be proud of what you drive in the middle of the funnel, be proud of what you drive that contributes to revenue, and be capable of tracking that all the way through. And then have brand be that force multiplier that's happening in the background that makes everyone's lives easier. CS, sales, marketing, CEOs, in fundraising, it helps for everything. But again, like, build yourself a repeatable process and have ownership of that lower the funnel pipeline, and that's how you get job security and really impress a lot of people.
Yeah, I think one of the things I heard is, you got to separate things you manage versus what you report to the board. I think at some point, I love that the lead story, and because I actually got an email from a CMO of a company that I'm doing work with, and I sent a note to the other operating partner. I'll be kind here, but this is BS, because the claim was, oh, we're doing great with pipeline. You got a pipeline problem like everybody, right? And the claim was, we have 5 times more website visitors than we had in January for our ICP. And I'm like, well, first of all, your ICP is, you didn't have one in January, so I don't know how we got that number. But second, like, who cares? The salesperson doesn't care that, I can't pay the mortgage, but I had a lot of web clicks. People are going to our website. Like, to your point, it's about what's important. I think leads is something you manage. If we don't have MQLs, why not? Are we not getting leads? Where are leads coming from? Because that's where it starts, but it's not something that I think the board should really spend a lot of time on, right?
It's
Yeah,
really
I think
interesting to hear both of you say that, though. I'm curious. I want to ask our listeners, drop it into the chat if you thought that was important and this is shocking to you. Because I think that you probably see a lot of people come into those meetings reporting on that at that level. Am I wrong? Or do you help educate them in that process?
yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Well, I
Oh,
don't think it's a horrible thing to have in there, but I think that just provides clutter. Kind of, to me, like, to piggyback on what Ann said, I've got a little bit different. I think what the board wants to do is they want to know how we did. That goes out in the pre-read, and so they get it, and so they're going to have some questions on why and stuff like that. So you should have, like, here's how we performed from a pipeline build and from a booking side, and here's, some win-loss data and key metrics that are informative. It shouldn't be a news read. It should be interesting insights along with the metrics. But that is kind of like, that's old news. So when you get to the board meeting, they've seen it. And if you've done they've done the pre-read, you're not going to spend a lot of time there. Really, what they care about is what's going to happen, and what are we doing to make it happen. So to me, the different components are that, you've got to look at what pipeline is, but I think there's a big nuance there. Most companies have no idea what a good pipeline looks like. They think that, that if my close rates are 20%, I need a 5x pipeline, which to me is okay on a super general level, but it's very shallow and very dangerous. You have to know what a good pipeline looks like, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute, to be able to understand what your top of funnel needs to look like, and to be able to benchmark top of funnel performance versus standards. So it all starts with the right vision of what good looks like for a pipeline. And to me, you should know conversion rates at every stage to get you to close one. You should know your ASP. You should know your time in cycle. A lot harder to do with an early stage company than somebody who's a little bit more progressed, but you should have at least some assumptions. So in every single stage, how many units and how much ARR you should have at a given point in time to be able to provide the right coverage. And when you have that, you've got something that's golden, because now you can measure, how is my pipeline really? Do I have too much early stage, too much later stage? Am I heavily contingent on a couple big deals versus, oh, I got a ton of deals, but they're all small. What's going on? You can start doing an analytics on what's going on within the pipeline, which gives you better clarity to what you're going to sell. But the other thing you can do is back that up. If I have, like, I had this with this one company recently, their pipeline looks great, and their aggregate, ARR numbers are killing it. But then we started looking at the details behind units, and we're like, well, that's because you got $4 million RFPs that compose almost 40% of your entire pipeline. And the RFPs have typically not great win rates. So, like, that aggregate number looks good, but when you start looking at unit breaks down, then so we started deciding, why are we getting all these? So we redirected the BDR team to start working on, let's focus on the SMB marketplace, or the mid-market. Let's reshift our marketing spend so we're not hitting to the enterprise side. We need to build units. So having that clarity on units versus ARR within pipeline gives you so much information to be able to better predict results and make better management decisions. So when you go in a board meeting, you've got something that's very data driven to inform the board on how you're really doing. Sorry for the ramble, but you can tell I get excited about that, because most people don't do it, and they should. And when they do, it's gold.
And that's exactly, like, that whole demystifying the process of, like, how do you get to that? How do you get to it faster? Because that's how you're going to make the most out of that relationship. We had a question that dropped in chat, which is perfect time to ask it. And just a reminder, anybody that has questions as they come up, to drop them in the chat there, and we'll kind of weave them into the conversation or do Q&A at the end. But, you know, to kind of summarize what you just said, Brad and Ann, to add your input, one of the questions that came up was, how do you balance providing that data to your investors so that you have those forward-looking KPIs without getting too far into the weeds and giving them too much, so that the point you made at the top of the hours, I don't want 100+ page report. So how can they find that good balance to craft this into that data story?
The first thing I would do is ask the board what they want to see. That's where I would start, is, you know, try to figure out how much detail they want to see. But to Ann's point earlier, don't ask your board members to write the script for you. So ask them, but also have prepared or in the back of your mind what you think is important. And so maybe a good way to do that is say, here's what I'm thinking. How do you like this? What else do you want to see? And set up some standards. And I think to me, it's about a 5-page report. Here's what we sold and how we build pipeline. So it's a past look. And then you've got key observations and insights. Then it's here's how accurate we were with forecasting, because I think that's a thing that most groups missed. I think it's one thing to hit your numbers, but it's a different thing to hit your numbers purposely, do what you say you're going to do, and be accountable to it. Then I think you got a forward look, which is what the bookings forecast is and what the pipeline coverage looks like. And then the last thing, and you might have some trends in there to show, you know, how pipeline's progressing and some answers why. And the last thing is, here's my action plan, which is not data driven, but it's more, here's what our core priorities are, and here's what I'm going to be actioning on to continue success or address gaps, or both. And what do you want to see?
Yeah, I think the early stage, I'm always reminded of the first time I got invited to join a board meeting, and I came in with 20 slides about what I was doing and my department was doing. And my CEO was like, nope, give me one. Here's what matters. You know, we don't need to know all of that data. You can always put the excess in the appendix and like go look at it later, and or if it gets brought up in the meeting, have it available, but you don't need to. You can use this process on a quarterly basis. Your team should be diving deep into this data anyways, so having it is still good. But yeah, I think the other key slides, I think in the deck in general, as we were talking through, not just on the go-to-market front, but as a whole, I always like the slides that are what we've learned this quarter. Again, I work more in the early stage, so you're constantly learning. It's all about learning and being cognizant of what you've learned, what surprised you is also helpful for the board to know. Because again, you know, our day job is trying to spot trends, you know, that are around the corner. So, you know, you want engagement. That's always interesting to know. And then also a slide on what you need help with. Having that conversation and making sure that that board meeting is actually useful. It isn't just you talking through, here's everything, all the bullets of what we've done, but how can you engage the board to actually make them, you know, help you and want to work, you know, there's sometimes some low-hanging fruit that might take, you know, you might be banging your head against the wall trying to figure out how to get into, you know, some partner at Goldman Sachs that you're trying to sell to, and your board member has a direct connection. Like, think about how you can leverage your board. It's not that they can do everything, but it's presenting some of those questions at the end are always helpful too. And then as we get down to like, what are those slides? Again, it's that repeatable process. It's like, okay, what did you do based off of your goal? How are you tracking it? Brad, you made a great point. Yes, when you're first starting to do this, you know, especially in the early stages, you're first starting to build out your pipeline. You should have metrics on all of that. You're trying to figure out, what is that sales velocity? You're trying to figure out what are the percentages of opportunities to close, SQLs to close. It's going to be vital, especially as you start to grow your sales team and having an understanding of how fast deals are closing. It also gives you an understanding if there's a problem in your funnel. Going back to like the leads conversation, I do believe in MQLs. You should be tracking those. What is marketing saying as a qualified lead? If there's a huge gap between a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead, you've got a problem, and you've got to fix that internally between your marketing and sales leaders to have a true understanding of what is your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Are you hitting the right persona? Are the tactics correct? What are the ads you're using? I remember there's, especially I'm a big believer in account-based marketing, and there's campaigns that, are purely on trickery to get some gift and to get someone in. And yes, if that's a qualified lead, great. But if they have no idea why they're on your list or talking to the salesperson, like, that does not count. Like, that's why, again, the top of the funnel gets so gamed that it just feels vanity to me. So you want to have that understanding, back to your point, Brad, of what are those, what does that conversion look like within your funnel? And really know what can be optimized next quarter. If your opportunity to close rate is taking, months to happen, well, is that something that can be a goal for next quarter, of trying to decrease that from taking 2 months to maybe taking, 8 weeks, or sorry, that would be 2 months, 6 weeks or something to that regard. How can you increase sales velocity? These are important metrics to start tracking. You don't have to be perfect at the early stage, but how do you start tracking and getting better? It's really about the slope of the curve. How do you constantly get better? How do you refine your models? How do you refine your pipeline along the way?
What I saw that I like is, and one of the companies I work with, we set up this really cool reporting package, and we went, and this is a really good story too, to your point, leads, MQLs, we call them FTAs, which were pre-pipeline, first-time appointments, and then actual pipeline, all the way to close one, and tracking win rates and all that stuff. And we had conversion rates across the board. So, that marketing came up with the lead to MQL, MQL to FTA, and FTA to pipeline conversion rates. And then, sales was tracking conversion rates through different stages to closed one. And sales was actually doing pretty good, because they've actually increased their close win rates, which was terrific. But marketing was claiming victory on this, because they're like, well, look at all the leads I got, it's fantastic, and look at all the MQLs I got. But sales is not doing it, because the FTAs aren't converting the pipeline. And to your point, that the MQL definition was so broad that you basically had to be breathing and be on a list. You didn't have to demonstrate intent. It was just like, oh, that's a company that we would like to sell to. And they went to our website once. So they had like this big pile of leads. And so they looked like they were doing great, but they weren't converting the pipeline, because when we did outreach to the MQLs, no one would answer the phone. So they had like super low conversion rates. So by having those benchmarks, we're able to identify problems across stages and make adjustments in how we track things and how we report things. So it was really cool to have a report where we did, here's what actually happened versus the benchmark, red, yellow, green on conversion rates. And if it's red, let's figure out how we're going to fix it. And yellow, we got to fix it too. So I thought that's a really good call, having that waterfall and that, tracking on conversions to identify problems. Now, on a board level, I'm not sure that they want to see all that, but those are the kinds of things that maybe you present at a board level, on a high level, and to be able to talk to them about what was.
I think the funnel, to that point, like having your funnel, which I think the modern funnel now kind of looks a little bit more like an hourglass if it's done correctly, with kind of the customer success and referral base, trying to drive back up and build more middle of the funnel opportunities if done correctly. Yeah, I think it's important to showing the metrics. I mean, again, this is like one small portion, but you can show the metrics, both conversion time to the next stage. And then for those instances where something's off, you know, what a board wants to see is, yeah, we noticed this was off. We noticed this, it's taking longer to get to this stage. Here's how we reverse engineered, figured out exactly what was happening. Hey, we had a campaign and it brought in a bunch of low quality leads. That's
Yeah.
okay. At the early stage, that's okay. Test, but test, iterate, refine, get better.
Yeah.
Don't just show that, hey, like our SQL to opportunity, you know, drop drastically. Well, what's happening? Like, you know, should you evaluate your disco meetings? Like, you know, how are you, what's going on in the process that can be refined? And I think that's the piece that really builds confidence, I think, with a board member, is understanding, yeah, it's off, that's okay, but like, how are you fixing it in the future?
Yeah.
And are you recognizing it? The worst thing is have someone else point it out that doesn't look right. And then have you scrambling, trying to figure out, well, why doesn't it look right? You should have this data ahead of time. You should be looking at this data on a regular basis. There should be no surprises.
Yeah, and the board deck should have enough detail where they could say, I get it, but the board deck doesn't have to tell the complete story. That's again why they've got you, is to fill in the gaps, right? So Ann, what would be like if you had 5 or 6 things, 5 or 6 KPIs on go to market, what would be? Is that bourbon in your background there? I can't see. There's
Potentially. It's not a real background,
all right,
but
just checking. I don't know how
it's not mine.
how it's working out there. What would be like the 5 or 6 things that, like, if you had to pick out KPIs to kind of get to that earlier question, that you would want to make sure you had in a board deck?
Yeah, I think it's different I mean, it can be different for a lot of, depending on the company, but I think
Sure.
the basics are really having that understanding of the funnel, both from a go-to-market team in general, really understanding what's driving the funnel, what's driving some of these activities, how is it being filled from the middle or from, you know, if you're filling it from the top, what's working, what's not working, and how are you going to improve going forward for the next quarter. I think there's a lot that gets filled in there. I think on the sales side, you know, you want to understand where your targets are and how you're going to be getting to them. Does that mean this quarter, are you hiring more AEs? Like, what's the ramp time for your AEs? Because hiring, and that's a whole other process that I think people don't realize when they step into it, how challenging that can be. Like, you hire an AE, you hire a SDR, like, they are not going to be ramped overnight.
And they don't comprehend it in their budget. They're like, okay, it's January 1st. We're going to hire 6 new AEs. They're starting in January. And like, wait a second, factor that in your budget.
Yeah, you have to understand how long is it going to take for them to ramp? What are the expectations? You have to build that ramp into your overall plan. You have to also have that understanding of like how challenging is hiring for your team. And so at the end of the day, I think there's that piece of it. It's really important to have that kind of nailed down and have an understanding of how are you going to grow sales. If it's, you know, more product-led growth, like, what are the tactics you're going to use to start generating more? And where does that process, again, going back, you want that repeatable process. You don't want one-offs. You don't want to have to be making it up every single quarter. You want that understanding of, here's what we've done. Here's how we're going to, you know, refine it and do better and repeat.
So to answer on my side, that was a great answer. But on my side, if I had to do a dashboard that had like KPIs on it, the 5 or 6 things I'd want to see would be, what did you sell versus plan? Okay. Second, forecast accuracy. What did you say you're going to sell versus what you actually did? Third, close rate versus plan. Sales cycle versus benchmark, ASP versus benchmark. And then I'd want something on top of funnel. So I'd want to see MQL to pipeline conversion rates versus plan. And last, I'd want to see that pipeline benchmark. Here's all the stages. Here's how many units. Here's how much ARR that we're supposed to have. for a given time frame. Like, let's say your sales cycle is 90 days, so you want a 90-day window. And here's what we actually have. That to me would be a beautiful dashboard where instantly you could see, are we doing okay? And provoke some really good questions. So hopefully that helped answer the question that we had.
That's good. I think we took it a few different directions there, right? And I think it's interesting too that like it's not a show and tell. It's not a show and tell to come in with everything buttoned up. And to Ann's point of like, show us where the gaps are, show us where you've identified things and, where there are weaknesses. There's an art to going into that board meeting with some vulnerability, because that's how you get the most accurate health check. And especially, I want to ask on the early stage side, like, sometimes they don't have the intel or the ability to forecast some of the things that you want to look for and know. So how can you help them to better prepare to come with the intel that you need to be able to start crafting that forecasting story? That can be tricky.
Yeah, in the early stage, I mean, you can't necessarily be data driven because you don't have the data. So you're more data informed. It's like, what data do you have available? What data are you leveraging? And then you're testing, and you should be testing the entire time, trying to figure out what's working, what doesn't. I always like the kind of 70-30 rule for here's what we know works. We're going to put our heads down. We built an engine. It's repeatable. This is what we're going to do. That's our 70%. Then 30% every quarter goes to testing something new, trying something else out. You constantly at the early stage have to be just being out there, trying something different. You never know what could potentially work. And as long as you're tracking that, that might be another addition to, your demand gen strategy.
Yeah. And, on the side where I work, and I do work with, more, sometimes bootstrapped, $1 million, $2 million companies. Most of mine is a little bit further down where we're like C or D series. They don't have all the metrics either. In fact, I got a $60 million company, and I'm trying to get them to do this stuff. Like, well, Brad, it's really complex. We'll never figure it out. I'm like, well, you know what? Then let's put some stakes in the ground to based on your knowledge of the marketplace. Let's build some assumptions, and let's start building data to compare against our assumptions. Pick a lane and then measure against it instead of just going blind, because guess what? Your business is going to continue to change and change and change. You're never going to have perfect data. So pick something now that you can use to calibrate yourself to what good looks like. And by doing that, then you start focusing on managing against this. So that's how we typically approach it, because I've got a publicly traded company. I'm like, I was talking to the PE guy. I'm like, I'm just starting with this group, and I'm like, I bet your data is really good. He goes, no, it's horrible. So it's
more complicated, right?
What's that?
It only gets more complicated. You have a lot of siloed data,
right?
Each one of the channels operates different. You've got to figure out each one of the metrics that are derived from each channel is different. So you need to evaluate them on their own. So yeah, I think it's always going to be a challenge, but I think if you're able to analyze each one of those and try to at least be tracking them and pulling them into a central place, you're
partly the discipline of just focusing on here's what's important and tracking against it. I mean, what's more important than building pipeline and closing deals? Those are the two most important things. So be as specific as you can about what you're trying to achieve. And like, even to the sales rep level, you should have an activity waterfall that shows here's how many MQLs we need to get. Here's how many FTAs you need to get. Here's what sources they're going to come from, inbound, outbound, AE generated, and have dashboards that track that performance. Because an AE is not going to, a salesperson's not going to build their own pipeline unless you hold them down and make them do it. So, and the way you hold them down and make it do it is you measure it, and you hold them accountable, and you measure it every week to make sure you're winning the week, because the week rolls into a month, the months roll into quarters, quarters roll into years. So win the week, that's the kind of philosophy I think that works best.
That's a good summary, Brad. And I know we got to get Ann on a plane, and I was quick reminder, if you have questions, want to make sure we get them in here, drop them in the chat for us. But any common mistakes, pitfalls that you've seen, along the journey that we can, give people a tip, heads up to avoid?
I would say holding off and doing the board slides last minute is the common mistake. I think if you're tracking these metrics as a team, you should be getting them on a quarterly basis, and you now have the capability to automate this as well. So again, you shouldn't be seeing these numbers for this first time internally as an executive team, the week before the board meeting. So the better that your team is either becoming data informed or data driven, I think that's really the kind of road to success.
Yeah. I would say be prepared, have answers, and be true. Don't show up there and try to bluff your way through it. If you don't know the answer, that's bad, but don't make up the answer. The best thing you could do is you have the board deck, and you should be prepared for any kind of question you're going to get, versus sitting there scratching your head. Because that's, with a good board, you should get a lot of questions. So I think those would be my keys to success.
Well, I appreciate it. I want to make sure that we get Ann to her plane on time, and she's not having to run through the airport, but you've both provided great insights and appreciate it so much. I'm going to reach out to our attendees and ask, for feedback. Encourage all of you to connect with us on LinkedIn. Anything that comes up as you're digesting this, or as we share the recording with you afterwards, feel free to keep the questions coming for sure. Brad, thank you so much. And thank you so much. We've learned a lot. I think there were a lot of good points, and hopefully we've demystified some of the things that are causing folks anxiety, or at least encourage them to go into that next board meeting strong, prepared, and ready to open up the data, open up the story, and get some good takeaways. So
thanks, Tanya.
all right, thanks everyone.